of a couple of things. Number one, the advent of technology, and we talked a bit about the different, things that happened. Okay, sorry, it's the rumbling. Oh, yeah, looks like that. The different advents of technology, like the invention of the steam engine, the invention of the cotton gin, the invention of interchangeable parts. Okay. Number two, the discovery of both iron and coal, which makes, and I guess maybe I should have put that first, because obviously with the iron, we are able to manufacture new and different things, and the coal is able to power these new steam engines. And finally, it's an era of prosperity, so there is money, all right? People have money to invest. People have money to produce things, because and of course, people want to make money because the dominant, I guess, philosophy when it comes to economics is capitalism. All right. Now, of course, these changes happen over a period of about 50 to 60 years, and we do see some radical changes in society. Okay, which is why we refer to it as a revolution. Number one, the advent of marketing. Okay, we are now purposely pushing different products on you, products that you may or may not need, but things that will radically affect your life. Okay. In addition, remember that things like newspapers and pamphlets, no longer are they being supported by the readers and the articles that they publish, but by the advertisements that people put in there. We see it as a lifestyle, and of course as a new word, a new verb, shopping. Okay? You are not buying things because your old one ran out. You are buying things because I love that hat. Jade has a hat. I want one too. I'm going to go out and buy one. Jade, where did you get the hat? Okay? All right? And so, yay. Okay? And then, of course, because of this, we see a change. People's lives before the Industrial Revolution, for the most part, obviously there's exceptions, but for the most part, are run by the farm. Okay? You wake up when the sun comes out, you go to bed when the sun goes down. Okay? You eat the food that you grow, you live according to your schedule. Now you move into a factory life where your schedule is determined by your manager. Okay, so obviously that determines when you're waking up, when you're leaving the house, when you're going places, when you're eating, okay, when you come home. And so now your life revolves around that. Okay, in addition, factories are not the safest, cleanest, most environmentally friendly places, so you are now exposed to various toxins, various chemicals, various accidents that you, I guess, normally would not do. All right? And so, life continues like this, okay, throughout Europe. And I promise I'll come back. Okay? Most of, and because this is where we ended, most of the factories are in Europe. Okay? England, because they were the first, and then from there, the manufacturing spreads into places like France, and believe it or not, Belgium. Belgium was number 2 through most of the 1800s. Germany, Switzerland, etc. Okay, not to say that there weren't some in Spain or Italy or Austria, but this is where the bulk of it was. Okay, outside of that, America, the United States. Okay. Especially here in the Northeast. So if you want Mr. Santos's history tour of Utica, we'll just walk up and down Broad Street and look at all of the old factories that once upon a time made Utica, New York, the Union suit capital of the planet. Yes, you wanted those cool cotton red long john underwears with the flap of the butt, so right? This is where they were made, right here. This is where all of them went to the rest of the world, okay? Now, of course, you know, there was some maybe in Canada, maybe there was some in other places, but most of it, Europe, America, okay, that was it. And so, by the middle/end of the 1800s, okay, number one, obviously the people who are making all of the money are the factory owners and the investors, okay? If you are an everyday worker, okay, you are working 12-hour shifts for minimal wages, okay? Because remember, we still have the concept of free labor. Everybody deserves to work. That doesn't necessarily mean I have to pay you what you're worth, all right? But because, you know, that's capitalism. I'm trying to make the most money possible, okay? Now, also because of this, all right, either because people were looking for work or they were trying to get back to a lifestyle, you know, that they had lost, okay? You weren't going to be a successful farmer in England. You weren't going to be a successful farmer in Germany because everything was now geared towards industrialization, okay? But even though the Northeast in America was getting full of factories and manufacturing and, you know, all of that, it's a pretty big place, okay? People would come, buy a wagon, buy a horse, and just head west, okay? Plenty of free land in Oklahoma or Texas or Missouri or even Florida, okay? So you could still live that lifestyle. Canada, same thing, okay? You could just head out to, you know, Saskatchewan or something and live free on an open farm, whatever. And don't get me started on Australia. You know, once the prisoners made a home there, the rest of Australia is still waiting to you know, welcome people. Okay, so we begin to see now. We begin to see then all kinds of immigration to these places, and these aren't the only places, but these were like the big three. Okay, in some places, okay. You know, and Nate's not here. We used him as a tailor, but we still have our shoemaker. All right. The people that are replaced by the industrialization obviously aren't very happy. And of course, you know, poor Grady has to go work in the same shoe factory now that replaced his handcrafted, handmade, you know, quality shoes. And so, yeah, a lot of workers would purposely destroy the machines that they, you know, had replaced them, that had made them irrelevant. Okay, oh wait, we've got Morgan the gun maker. All right, don't even get me started on what Morgan would do with, you know, the guns that she makes to the gun factory. All right, type of thing. And so, yeah, okay. Now, in this case, you know, some people went to the factories to make money. Some people went to other places to live a better lifestyle. Some people, like the Irish, left because both had failed them. All right, the British wouldn't hire them in their factories. They were like the largest industrialized nation in the 1800s, but they were very anti-Irish. The Irish were very discriminated against. Okay, and of course their farms failed. They're starving to death. So the only option they have, because they can't work in factories and they can't farm anymore, was to come to places like America or Canada or Australia. Most of them came to America, all right, and start new, okay? So, yeah, society got better, people got rich, but in comparison, it was still only for a very small group, okay? And those people that kind of had it bad off before, it got worse, and the people that were okay, it got bad. Okay, unless they were happy working 12-hour shifts in a factory, type of thing. All right. So from that, then we are going to move on to other parts and other social/economic revolutions. Some of the minor ones. Okay. you may think, minor? This is Russia, Santos. Yeah, this is kind of a minor one. Because, and most of you got this question right on the last test. I don't remember this test part. They're right there. Yeah, so as soon as I'm done talking. No, there was like literally 2 more makeups that needed to be done. Not that I don't trust you, Jose, but I trust you. We probably give that person the test and, whatever. So, now we're done. Okay? Now, as most of you got correct, Russia was very behind most of Europe. They were very backwards compared. All right? And so, when the French Revolution happens, the Russians do their best to keep these ideas away from the common people. It's like, what? What's going to happen if Russian peasants find out that the Tsar is not chosen by God, and if they rise up and cut off his head, they can make life better for themselves. Okay, we're going to ignore the whole Napoleon thing. But things can happen. Now, the Russians are successful, okay, in keeping those revolutionary ideas out. They are successful in defeating Napoleon, all right, but everything's out there. Now, what ends up happening is that in 1825, the Russian Tsar ends up dying without an heir. He has no sons, all right? And so what ends up happening is that, another male is going to take over, another male relative, but some people within Russian society are like, whoa. The Tsar died, the Tsar died without perfect, empty seat, without an heir. And yes, maybe we want his uncle or his cousin or his, I don't know who you are, his brother, to take over, but wouldn't this be the perfect opportunity to kind of make some changes for the Russian government? Because we're so far behind everyone else. And even though most of the countries still have kings and shit, like England, theirs is just like, kind of the figurehead now. And even the French, they brought the king back, but even the French have some rights now, thanks to the revolution. And, the Holy Roman Empire is gone, but, different Germans and the Austrians have a couple more rights. Why can't we do that? And so, because it happened in December, okay, number one, there is a group known as the Decembrists who were like, we want to be more like France. We want to be more like Austria. They still have a king, and we don't mind if the cousin or the uncle or the brother take over, just as long as we get some of these, let's move society forward about 300 years, and some of these freedoms that the French and the Austrians and all of them have. Okay? There were other groups, okay, that wanted something like England has. Okay? They're like, no, what if? Now, hear me out. The British are doing great. Here's the King of England. Wave, King of England. Yeah, see, look at that. Perfect. Yeah, look at that. Yeah, it's awesome. All right? Yeah, Parliament, thanks Parliament, handles all the stuff. They just smile. No, you got to do work, Dan. But smile and wave. All right? That's all we need. Why don't we do that? The Tsar, whoever it is, whether it's the cousin or the uncle or the brother, we can just smile and wave, and we can create, something new. And then, of course, there was the very small radical few, okay, who were like, fuck all that shit. Look at the Americas, okay? Look at the United States, look at Haiti, look at South America. Don't look at Brazil, because they still have a king. But Mexico by now has gotten rid of their king. Why don't we just do that? Okay, they're kind of in a rough patch, kind of like, not the steadiest thing, but can we really say that current Russia is all that great? Come on, we're 300 years behind everyone else. All right, so why don't we do that? Okay, well, one of the cousins, a man named Nicholas, becomes king, becomes Tsar. And he's basically like, yeah, fuck No. All right. We are keeping things the way they are. All right. No European thing, no British thing, no Republican thing. Okay. And in fact, Nicholas is very, very, very religious. Okay. He's Eastern Orthodox, and so many of the things that he bases his government on all have to do with like religious laws and strict obedience and like all of this other stuff. Anyone disagrees, he literally has you killed. And in this case, all right, since people are now going into hiding, this is one of the first instances where we see the creation of a secret police to hunt down people because they're meeting in secret, they're plotting in secret. Type of thing. And so now we get, this kind of stuff where, did you hear what happened to Jade's group? All right, they were infiltrated by the secret police and all of them have been eliminated. All right, hey, tell you what, why don't we just shut up, or I guess we can move to France or something and just, live our happy lives. Okay? And so, we see a little inkling, and of course it's crushed. Okay? So that it doesn't continue. All right? Now, we're moving to Egypt. Okay? I know. You guys are like, what? All right. Egypt, up until this point, had been a part of the Ottoman Empire. Okay? During the era of Napoleon, one of the places that Napoleon invaded was Egypt. You're thinking, what the hell, Napoleon? The British nominally controlled it. They had a presence there because whoever controlled Egypt would control the Suez, not the Suez, it doesn't exist yet, control the Nile, and the shipping that's through the area, and of course all of the food and later the cotton that comes through Egypt. So Napoleon wanted to take it over, and he is successful. But then the British show up, and Napoleon abandons Egypt. The British beat the remnants of Napoleon's army. He goes find the Rosetta Stone. Okay, of course, that's how the British get it, and why it's now in the British Museum. Just FYI. So yeah, okay. When the French leave, okay. And the British leave too, Egypt is kind of in shambles, government-wise, all right? And a man named Muhammad Ali, who is an Egyptian, takes over. Now, the Egyptians are different from the Ottomans. They're different people, they're a different culture. Yes, they share the same religion, okay? But, I mean, come on, you've got Christians all over the world, and different cultures, different races, different backgrounds. Okay, so in this case, they're like, yeah, no, we don't want to be a part of the Ottoman Empire anymore. Number one. Number two. Okay. He starts to implement some of those ideas from the French Revolution in Egyptian society. Okay, and guess what? Egypt actually gets better. All right? He makes reforms to agriculture. He makes reforms to education. Suddenly in Egypt, we're getting things like medical schools, and Egypt is becoming, pretty important. Okay? Fast forward, okay, into the Industrial Revolution, mid-1850s. Egypt is nominally under the protection of the British. They've formed an alliance, and the British promised to, keep the Ottomans and other people out. Whereas, they will, with their navy and their military, keep Egypt safe. And at the same time, they will help out the Egyptians. And so one of the things that ends up happening is that, yes, the Egyptians begin to produce cotton, all right? And this is probably the biggest reason why the British never came into the Civil War on the side of the South. Remember, 80% of the cotton that Britain used in their factories came from the American South. Well, once they discovered that they could grow cotton in Egypt, the Egyptians became the world's leading producers of cotton, and their number one client were the British, okay, because the British helped them with their infrastructure and provided them with protection, okay. Eventually they just took on, but you know, that's the British, okay. Some of the things that they did, you know, they constructed new irrigation canals to expand agriculture throughout most of Egypt. Of course, most of that was for cotton, but it benefited other crops. And of course, by now we've figured out, because I think, Dan, you asked about hydroelectric and things like that, they've figured those things out, you know, so now we see the construction of dams, the flooding of areas. It does help not only with the manufacturing process, but in this case, the more you can flood, the more water, the more arable land for growing crops and growing cotton, okay? And yes, I got ahead of myself. Eventually, one of those canals is the Suez, which is dug across Egypt from the Red Sea to the Mediterranean. All right, that comes a little later, but this is where, you know, the impetus comes in. All right, so Egypt is pretty successful, okay? Yeah, all right? So, okay, now, what about the rest of the Ottoman Empire, okay? The Ottoman Empire, after the Tulip period, has not had a whole lot of luck, okay? They have lost most of their European land, okay? In the early 1800s, the Greeks rebel and form their own independent country, like for the first time in like 3,000 years type of thing. And it is with that defeat, okay, that, you know, the Ottomans are basically like, okay, we're like everybody's, you know, doormat. We're just getting beaten, not only by most of Europe, but by, you know, other areas. So what the Sultan begins to do is like thinking, well, if European countries are the ones that are beating us, why don't we hire Europeans to come in and train our military and reform our education system and, you know, our medical practices, et cetera, et cetera. Well, some of you, once again, got this right, where many Muslim countries return to a more traditional format. And so originally, people are against this kind of change. He's overthrown, he's killed, and a more conservative sultan is put into power, okay? But by the 1830s, okay, we have a sultan named Tanzimat who is finally able to convince the rest of Turkish society that, like, you know what, we really do need to open up our thinking, because we not only have we lost all of Europe, except for the little bit where Istanbul is, sorry, I taught about Constantinople, and Istanbul was Constantinople, but now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. Now it's there. All right. So only that little part, okay, is still theirs. We already mentioned they've lost Egypt. Okay. They've lost a bunch of other places, and so they're like, okay, maybe we should let a couple of Europeans in. All right. Maybe that sultan that we had killed and overthrown and killed was onto something. All right. So, you know, 30 years after his death, we do see them, okay? European advisors are brought in to reform the military, okay? Obviously, we've, pardon my Turkish, we've gotten our asses kicked by Europeans. Maybe if our armies start fighting like European armies, we'll be able to do some damage to them, okay? And of course, if we want to be a bit more European, okay, you know, we'll have to change, you know, more of our society. And so eventually, they do take different European works and begin to translate them into Turkish. People in Turkey are taught different European languages, all right? So we're going to teach you guys French, we're going to teach you guys English, we're going to teach you guys Italian. You know, that way we can bring in Europeans from different countries to you know, make us you know, better, hopefully more competitive. You know, maybe we'll even get Egypt back. Who knows? All right. Spoiler alert: it really doesn't work. It actually leads to the rise of another radical movement, and then by 1911 they're pretty much gone. It was only World War I that kind of kept them propped up for a little bit longer. But then after World War I, the Ottomans are completely overthrown. And we get the modern nation of Turkey. Okay? Looking at India, then. Okay? By the 1800s, okay? Now, India wasn't actually run by the British per se. Okay? Because when the British first arrived, if you recall, they had sent these charter companies. You know, it was basically a pool of investors that got their resources together and, you know, were able then to take over certain industries. Now, of course, the British military backed them up, and whenever these companies were in trouble, there was always the British Army and the British Navy to bail them out. Okay? And so, by this point in time, it was known as the East India Company. There had been a lot of different ones over the years, but this ends up being a conglomeration of all of those. And I'm sorry, you know, if we were learning Indian history or even a more in-depth world civ, like we could go into like, you know, the British East India, the Dutch East India, the this East India, but suffice it to say, we end up with the East India Company. Okay? They have a monopoly. They're the only ones allowed in India. They're the only ones allowed to buy, sell, trade, obtain Indian goods. They're the only ones allowed to sell things back. Okay? Now, what ends up happening, okay? The British get their cotton before Egypt comes along. They get cotton from India. Okay? They take the cotton to England. They make cloth. Okay? Now, the people in England buy the cloth, and that's great, but there's so much, okay, we got to find another place to sell it. Why don't we sell it back to the Indians? Okay? Now, through most of history, you know, Indians, they're the ones that actually came up with the idea of growing cotton and making it into cloth, and people had been doing it for thousands of years. But now the British have come in and said, no, bad Indians, you do not make your cotton into cloth at home. You buy British cloth that has been made in England. Okay? And the English are able to back this up with the military and through force and intimidation and whatnot. Okay? In addition, oh, hey, little Indian, not trying to be racist, sorry. In addition to cloth, here's some other crap that we made in England that you may or may not need, want, use, whatever. Okay? And so, in this case, we begin to see this imbalance, number one, but also like a loss of Indian culture. Okay? Because, all right, number one, you know, Indians are now forgetting how to, you know, do their customary artisanal stuff because they're buying stuff from the English. But instead of using like traditional cookware, buy these iron skillets from English factories. Instead of using, you know, belts and jewelry and whatnot that they have made themselves, no, buy this cheap crap from a British factory and use that instead. Okay, number one. Number two, in order to like gain favor with the British, much of the Indian elite begin to forget their own languages and take on English, because obviously the British aren't going to learn Hindi or any other language out there. I mean French, yeah, or classical Greek, because that's a sign of education. But we're not going to learn like some Indian language. And so English becomes then the dominant language. And so over the years, over time, okay, even though the Indians do this to gain favor with the British, little by little, okay, the wealthy lose their land, the peasants lose what little they have, and pretty soon all of India is thrown into poverty as the British basically control not only the raw materials and the means of production, but also all of the markets. If you want to buy anything, you're buying British products that were made thousands of miles away with Indian raw materials that all went to England as opposed to your local, okay, producers. All right. This map is just here to show then, originally when the British came in, they controlled a small part, then they control a bigger part, and then for the first time ever in the 1800s, India is united, but it is united under British control. Okay, it's all one giant province for them. All right, we will finish off this chapter, I believe, looking at China. All right, now, for the most part, China was ignored, believe it or not. Because remember, they weren't part of that group, looking for knowledge. Most of them were kicked out. There really wasn't a whole lot other than silks and some spices, which, we can already get from the Portuguese or from the French, and their small little presents that they had in China. All right? But, so there really wasn't a whole lot of focus. The Industrial Revolution changes that, okay? Because not only do we need more raw materials for the factories, but there's only so much crap Europeans can buy. There's even only so much crap that the Indians can buy. We need a new place to start selling. Hello, China. All right? We can start selling stuff to the Chinese. Okay? Now, the Qin dynasty, which took over in the 1640s, was still in power. All right? And they're the ones that are responsible for growing China into the mega country that it is today. All right? Because they just kept expanding farther and farther into Asia. Okay? Remember, any contact with outsiders was avoided, any kind of innovation was avoided, because, like we mentioned during the Enlightenment chapter, practical knowledge, not theoretical. Okay? Well, we don't care about some a squared, b squared equals c squared, and calculating gravity 9.2 meters per second squared. All right, we want to see something that gives us stuff right now. And so yes, by the 1800s, Europe is so far ahead of the Chinese in almost every area. And so now that we need more raw materials, now that we need new markets, the Europeans are like, yeah, I know we've kept away because your emperor told us to, but F you. No, now we're coming in, whether you want us to or not. Okay? So, we end up with a period known as the Opium Wars. This is one of the saddest and most tragic things that the British did, even more so than in India, that the British did to a place. Okay? Now, just to give you a brief background here, yes, opium is a drug. All right? Does anyone know where it comes from? Poppy seeds. Poppy seeds, yeah, poppies. Okay? I like poppies. So yes, you can take the seeds and, just like any plant, okay, you can eat one snack with whatever. Okay? No, I mean, you can grow hemp, all right, and hemp is used for clothing and for rope and for paper and shit like that. But you take the leaves and smoke them, and yeah, you got yourself, that marijuana shit. I remember living in South America, and a lot of the natives were like, do you have coca? No? They'd give us these little leaves, And they'd be like, oh, this will give you energy, this will cure your hunger, this will get rid of your headache. And, we'd see everybody chewing these leaves, and so I was like, oh, sure. And yeah, you got a boost of energy. It's like drinking coffee. You had a headache. It cleared you right up. It's like taking like 3 Excedrin and whatever. You were hungry. It was like, all right, I could stand a couple more hours. Well, turns out it's the plant where you get cocaine from. You just chew the leaf. I mean, it just gives you these micro doses. Cocaine, they take the leaves, they mush them all down, and then they extract the compound and make it like a jillion times more potent so that you can snort it up your nose. All right? Yeah. You're like, okay, where do I get this plant, Santos? We found it in Bolivia a lot, and northern Argentina. That's why I asked. I don't know, in Brazil? No? Okay. And yeah, some people later on were like, you can also find it in Peru. And they were like, well, that's where they get cocaine from, right? And I was like, what? It's just a leaf. Cocaine's like this white powder shit. And they're like, yeah, you crack the leaf, and you extract the stuff, and you add chemicals, and you make it more potent, and next thing you know, you got the white powder, yeah. But the leaf, and it was like all the natives, I'm not trying to be racist here, but they all just chewed on it like all day long, and they're just like, oh yeah, just chew on it. And it's like, oh, you're right, headache's gone, shit, oh, this is good. All right, it's like, oh man, like, I'm tired, right? Okay, chew the coca leaf, and man, I got energy. All right, I'm gonna need to drink coffee. But yeah, okay. Emma's looking it up. So it's just like, so yes, opium comes from poppy seeds. Okay, just simple poppy. All right. Now, okay, so it starts off in India. This is where it's grown. This is where people did whatever. And yes, the Indians and the British, understood what opium was doing. Okay? Now, remember that for the longest time, the Chinese would only trade with Europeans as long as they were paid in silver. Okay? And that's how it starts. Okay? The British go to China, they discover tea. They're like, yeah, we want your tea, because we're British, we love tea, and we will pay in silver. Okay? Oh, and by the way, okay, fine, I know we're giving you silver and you're giving us tea, and not that we're trying to push stuff, but we've got cotton, we've got cloth, you can make clothing out of it, you don't just have to wear, silk all the time. Oh, and by the way, we've got this stuff from the poppy plant that grows in India and Afghanistan and Pakistan and stuff like that. And I mean, it could feel good, all right? It'll relax you. Oh, something hurts? Because that's where you also get most of your, drugs, your narcotic drugs that take away pain. Okay? Now, by the 1700s, okay, the British begin to claim, you know what? We don't got enough silver, all right? And we really, really want to buy your tea from you. Would you take opium instead? Now, by this point in time, enough people have tried it that they're like, sure, yeah, we'll take the opium. And, people begin to realize that not only am I a little bit hooked on it, but I could sell it to my fellow Chinese, all right? And, I can make my money back. Okay, granted, British Jade isn't paying me in silver anymore. Thanks, Jade. But Jade is giving me opium, and I can sell the opium to other Chinese people and make my money that way. Eventually, enough Chinese get hooked so that now when the British show up, they're like, oh, we don't give a fuck. You can have all the tea you want. You gotta eat more of that opium. Seriously, okay? And so by this point in time, all right, the British are like, yeah, but we're going to need a lot more than the tea for the opium. Where's that silver you guys have been collecting for the past couple hundred years? The whole country's hooked by now. And so, for the first time in about 300 years, silver begins to leave China, all right? Because, oh, and by the way, why don't you throw in some tea along with all that silver, here's your opium, okay? Economic crisis, and the population's hooked, So you got a bunch of addicts, and they're all poor because they've been buying now. So it's funny, first you introduce just a little part of the thing, then it's equal. All right, we'll give you opium for tea, type of thing, because we don't got no more silver. And then suddenly, oh yeah, you want the opium now? Give us your silver. So it goes the other way. All right. Never think the British aren't devious. No offense, any Brit Americans that may or may not be in here. All right. And so what ends up happening, though, now, believe it or not, this is only happening in the city of Canton. All right. And so the emperor sends someone to Canton, okay, with the mission of keeping the British out, or at the very least, keeping them from selling opium. All right. You want to sell your other shit, fine. But you want to buy anything from us, give us our silver back, and yeah, keep that opium shit out of our people. All right? The British are like, oh, no, you didn't. All right? And so, the British attack. Okay? Remember that by now, technologically, the Europeans have advanced, okay, so much, all right? Even though gunpowder was in fact invented in China, all right, they only used it for like entertainment, and on occasion they'd make small booms, all right? But by the 1840s, I mean, the British are using it in guns, in cannon, big booms, all right, big giant booms. And so while the British are fighting with cannon and rifles and all kinds of stuff, most of the Chinese are fighting back with sticks and spears and swords and yeah, okay. So those couple hundred years of advancement and isolation on the Chinese part has made them vulnerable to pretty much any European. Okay, so the British win. We call it the Opium Wars, but it really wasn't much of a war. Okay, so the British are able to take over parts of China. Okay, now what ends up happening is that we get what's called the Treaty of Nanjing, or I'm usually pronouncing it Nanjing. I know that's not the accepted pronunciation, but I'm old. All right, and this is where the British get Hong Kong and 5 other cities. Okay, they are permanently leased to the British. Okay, these are now yours. These are your colonies. Okay, the British don't have to follow any Chinese rules. The British don't have to do anything to respect Chinese custom or law. Oh, by the way, you guys have to pay for the war, since it's your fault it started by trying to kick us out and refusing our opium. Sorry, Marty. Okay? Oh, and if you want more opium, yeah, you know where to buy it. Right here, okay, British ships. So, pretty soon, the rest of Europe sees what the British have done. The United States sees what the British have done. And basically, they all come in and are like, hello, China. We would like the same deal you just gave to the British. Or, you thought the British bombardment was bad? Oh, pardon my Chinese. Ooh, fuck you up even worse. Okay? And the Americans say this, the Germans say this, the French say this. You know, so you get all of these other European countries doing the same thing. And so by the end of the 1800s, all of the coastal areas are under the control of some European country. Even the little ones, like the Netherlands and Belgium, control parts of Europe. Okay, parts of China. All right. Now, the interesting thing is, though, is that beyond the coast, Europeans wouldn't go any farther. They just controlled the coastal areas. And so, if you were Chinese and you wanted to avoid this European influence, if you wanted to avoid the opium, you literally could, go thousands of miles, you'd still be in China, all right, and isolate yourself, and that's what a lot of Chinese people did, okay? So yeah, you still have the Chinese that are along the coast, that are dealing with this mess that the British and the Americans and other Europeans made. Or, you could go to the untouched parts. All right? And so I just have a few maps that show then those changes. Okay? Now, these are in no particular order.